Hi, my name's Sophie and welcome to Sophie Knits Daily. Today I'm going to be taking you through lots of different whips, I think, maybe some finished objects if I manage to get finished objects done, but I feel like I haven't really given you a whip update in quite a long time and I have so many things on my needles at the moment that I want to get done. So we're currently still in Norway. We've been in Norway for I don't know how long, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, but we are heading to just outside Amsterdam for a festival, Lowlands Festival. I think you're going to be seeing this a little bit after the festival, but that's our destination and I think we have about 6 days to get there, and we're going to be travelling through 5 different countries: Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Germany and then the Netherlands to get there. So I thought it would be a bit of a fun idea to tell you about a whip in each different country. I think I've got 5 whips on the go, maybe 4 whips and 1 spinning project. And I also thought it would be fun to allocate a knitting project to each country to see how much progress I could get made in that particular country. So some of the countries we may not be in for very long, maybe just one night, we may just be driving through, but I'll update you in each country about the knitting project I'm working on and what I get done. So we've been in this spot in Norway for a few days now, and there's a really beautiful lake behind us that we've been going for a dip in and just kind of chilling here and relaxing after a lot of adventuring around Norway. So I've had quite a lot of downtime, more downtime than I've had in a while, and I wanted a bit more of a challenging project to work on, something that I'd have to think more about. So the project that I decided to focus on whilst here in Norway is my Agi the Sheep toy by Cynthia Vallet in her Mouche and Friends book. So this is the book that I've been working from, and Agi the Sheep is the one that you can see here, and I've made a lot of progress. So this is what I've got of Agi. I'd already worked on the head before being in this spot in Norway. I was working on the head whilst the Wimbledon final was on, or waiting for the Wimbledon final to start, and I had a bit of a pause because I was waiting for some safety eyes. I ended up going with some buttons that I found in Trondheim, so when we got to this spot I sewed the buttons on. I used the same black thread to do the nose and the little smile, and then I've been working from the neck down since then. I really love how this little sheep turned out. I've also done the little dress for Agi, and I'm working on a loop stitch vest, which will kind of add the loopy sheepiness to Agi the Sheep, but I'll talk about the vest in a moment. In terms of the pattern, I have really enjoyed the pattern in the book. I found it fairly easy to follow. There's chapters at the start of the book that go through different kind of learning sessions, maybe how to do short rows or different types of short rows, how to stuff the sheep properly and that sort of thing. So in the pattern for Agi, it references different sections of the book to refer back to if you need to, so that part's helpful. I think the pattern is really quite complex and I found that really interesting and a bit of a challenge. I absolutely love working with DPNs, but I haven't had much of a sock mojo recently, so being able to use DPNs for this sheep has been so enjoyable, and I feel like I've learned a lot in terms of kind of shaping of little toys and increases and decreases and different bind offs that I haven't used before. So it's definitely been a bit of a challenge, but very, very interesting and engaging. The other part that's been a bit of a challenge is there has been some mistakes in the patterns, but it's not been in the instructions, it's just been in the stitch count that's kind of at the end of the instruction, and it's only been kind of every now and again, and the stitch count in the next instruction is correct, so it's quite easy to see where the errors are, and I don't feel like it's made making this sheep any harder really. But I am a bit surprised because I don't think this is the first edition of this book. I think there's been a few editions and I don't really know much about book making or printing, but I didn't know whether they kind of updated or fixed those errors in the next publishing of a book, but that doesn't seem to be the case. There are still a few errors in there, which is unfortunate. But with the complexity of the shaping and the complexity of the kind of instructions in this pattern, I feel like you do get a toy that has so much character and personality and just looks really kind of detailed and interesting, and I'm really, really happy with it. The thing that I most like is I'll show you Agi's bottom, but she has a flat bottom, so she does sit down, and I've only got polyester toy stuffing in this. I haven't put anything heavy at the bottom, but I could do, because that's kind of where you seam it up and it's the easiest kind of part to access, but she sits down quite nicely, which is really sweet. And the only sort of change that I've done in the pattern, which hasn't really been something I wanted to do, is in this dress you do a knit pearl texture, and in the pearl column or bump you are supposed to crochet with the contrast thread, so the dress is like kind of square shaped or kind of like gingham maybe, and I haven't actually got a crochet hook to be able to do that, so at the moment Agi just has stripes on her dress, and I do think it looks very sweet, but I think because those pearl bumps are there, it does kind of need something to fill it, so I will be doing that in the future once I source a crochet hook small enough. I haven't actually talked about the yarn for this pattern. So the yarn recommended is a fingering weight. I think it's tuku wool, but I don't have any of that yarn. I'm using yarn from Stash. So I'm using Drops Nord in the colour 29, which is this kind of maybe slightly creamy white colour, and the makeup of this yarn is 45% alpaca, 30% polyamide and 25% wool, and I really like the alpaca for this toy specifically because it gives this fingering weight sock yarn quite a haze without having to hold mohair or kind of two strands together, and I think that haze is really nice in this pattern because it's sheepy, it's supposed to be kind of like fuzzy and hairy, so yeah, I think it looks really nice. The contrast colour I'm using is just leftover sock yarn as well. I think this is Coop Knits socks, yeah, in the colour Obsidian, and I still have quite a lot of that left over, but I only needed a tiny bit for the hooves. And then the contrast colour in the dress is this Ripples sock yarn in an unknown colourway, one that I can't remember, but it's a really nice purple and green, which has some white in it, which has been a little bit frustrating because here, for example, the white in the contrast colour kind of looks the same as the white from the main colour, so it's like there's a gap in the stripe, but that's going to be covered by the vest, so I don't think that's too important. So I'll show you the vest so far. So this is the vest. It uses loop stitches to create the kind of curliness of the wool, and I've been putting off doing this vest because I really hate this loop stitch. I did this loop stitch in my sheep toy by Susan B. Anderson, and it wasn't too bad in that toy because you were only doing the loop stitch kind of every so many stitches and every so many rows, but I did find the loops quite hard on my hands, and then reading this pattern you do this loop stitch so much more frequently, so it's pretty slow going, it is very tough on my hands. This yarn is much more slippery than the yarn that I use for my other sheep toy, and so I find that doing the loop stitch it kind of slips and glides, and it's really hard to keep the loop there whilst you're bringing that stitch over to like secure that loop stitch. So yeah, I'm finding it quite difficult on my hands, so this is going to take a little while, I think, longer than it should do for something so tiny, just a really tiny little vest, but I'm going to intermittently work on this tonight and tomorrow morning. And I'm not sure if we're going to leave Norway tomorrow. We're going to try and drive about 4 hours each day, and I'm not sure 4 hours will take us completely out of Norway, so I may have an extra day in Norway to dedicate to this project. So we'll see how this whip goes, but for the most part I'm really enjoying this little sheep, and I'm really happy with how it looks. It just makes me smile every time that I see it. So I may be able to update you on this being hopefully a finished object in my next clip, or I may be in Sweden in my next clip and I'll have moved on to my next whip. Who knows what's going to happen? You'll know quicker than I do, and I'll see you then. So we're still in Norway, we're right on the border between Norway and Sweden, but the extra night in Norway has meant I've been able to finish my Agi the Sheep. So yesterday I was working on the loop stitch vest, which I was able to finish. I took absolutely no enjoyment out of knitting this loop stitch vest. I would go as far as saying I strongly dislike / hate doing this loop stitch. It's really tough on my hands, especially on such small needles. And the only way that I was able to kind of ease some of the tension off my hands is intermittently you do kind of knit rows, and I was doing those so loosely so that I was able to do the loop stitches. But we got there in the end, and I think Agi really does need her loop stitch vest to give her that sheepy look. I think she especially looks sheepy from the back where it's like all loop stitch. And this stitch really does eat yarn, so it took up a lot of my kind of like scrap yarn that I'm using for this Agi, which is very, very good. Although surprisingly, I have quite a lot of yarn left. So I just dipped into my second 50-gram ball of Drops Nord, and I have a tiny bit left here. I bought this initially to make socks, and I probably still have enough to make a pair of socks if I do contrast heel, toe and maybe cuff. So that could still be socks in the future, who knows, but as I said before, I'm not really feeling like socks at the moment. And something I forgot to tell you in the last clip is the only modification I made to Agi is I didn't really take too much notice of the needle sizes. I tend to knit really tightly, and I only have 2.5mm needles, I think 2.75 and 3, and for some of it was recommended 2.25 and 2 possibly, I can't quite remember, but I just kind of took the needle sizes as a guide. For the smaller needle sizes I used 2.5, and for the larger needle sizes I used 3, and all of the measurements for Agi have come out well. Her vest fits her well, her dress fits her well, so I'm happy with that. The vest is just missing a button to kind of tie up the vest together, but I can find a button at another point. I also think I may have understuffed her. It's not something I've really done too much before, like stuffing a knitted toy, and I think looking at the pictures she looks a bit kind of looser than the pictures, but I think I prefer that. Her kind of limbs are a bit more bendy, she's a bit more, as she sits with her legs out rather than her legs being dead straight because of the kind of tension with overstuffing. So I quite like the way that I've stuffed her, and I think she has a lot of character. She's very sweet. I would like to knit more from this Mouche and Friends book by Cynthia Vallet, and a pattern that I really want to knit is the Alphonse pig. I think he's really cute, and there's even some instructions in the pattern for how to knit this clothes with a skirt, so you can have an Alphonse, he and she. And I did look in my stash for some pink yarn to bring with me on this trip to knit Alphonse, but I don't have any pink, so I'm looking out for that in my next kind of yarn shop trip. But I think that's all I have to say about Agi. I don't think this is going to be very common that I finish an object in the country we're in, because we're not going to be in some of these countries for very long at all, but we're going to be heading to Sweden today. I think it takes 5 hours to get to the spot that we're staying at in Sweden, which is like quite far south in Sweden, and I'll probably be driving 2.5 hours or so of that. I'll do the first part of the driving so that all of my passenger time will be in Sweden and I can work on my next whip. And I'll have the evening and the morning to see how far along this whip I can do, but I'll show you where I've got to so far. So my dedicated whip for Sweden is the Cloud Sweater by Petite knit. I picked up this yarn, it's Rauma Puno in, I can't remember what colour, but some sort of like really beautiful kind of rosy, dusty, pinky, mauvey colour. I picked it up in the Rauma factory shop, and I've been working on it quite a lot since, so I'm gonna try and see how much I can get done in Sweden. I am currently knitting in the round. I'm not entirely sure how much longer I have to knit in the round, but it's already quite long. I think I've sunk 5 balls of yarn into this, and the pattern recommends 9 or 10, so possibly halfway or just over halfway. The first time I knit this cloud sweater I didn't use all of the yarn amount that the pattern recommended. I had a whole ball of drops air left, so maybe I'm, I don't know, 60-70% of the way through this. I've done the collar, so I just have 2 sleeves and the rest of the body. I think the first thing I'll do on this when I pick it up as my passenger knitting is start on a sleeve and see how far through a sleeve I can get. But I will put a progress marker, or just a normal stitch marker, at this point in the body. So if I knit any more on the body, I can show you kind of definitively how much I've been able to knit in Sweden. I was thinking this would be the perfect knit for Sweden, as it's my most kind of heavy woolly knit that I've got on the needles at the moment. But the weather's turned again, and it's quite sunny again today, and I'm pretty warm sat out here. I'm sat in a shady spot and not in the sun, but there's lots of sunbathers at a beach around the corner, so maybe a woolly knit isn't really appropriate for this unusual summer weather that we're having, but I still think it's the most appropriately Sweden compared to my other kind of summer tops that I'm going to work on in Denmark, the Netherlands and Germany. So yeah, I'll update you when I get to Sweden on how far through this I get. So we're in Sweden and I finished a whole sleeve on my cloud sweater. So we got into Sweden yesterday. I did about 2 hours of knitting on the drive, maybe 2.5 hours. I did less of the driving than my boyfriend did. He very kindly did a bit more, as I had an unfortunate incident when running in Crocs through mud away from a dragonfly that was the size of my face. I slipped and twisted my ankle. So he did a bit more of the driving, which was very nice. And I had a bit more time to knit on this sleeve. And I probably put in maybe 2 hours in the evening and an hour this morning. I've never actually timed my knitting or how long it takes me to knit things. I always thought I might be a kind of generally fast knitter, or I just spend many hours knitting, but I've surprised myself in how much I've been able to do in like maybe 5 hours, and that is a real estimate. So now I only have the second sleeve and just a little bit more of the body to go. I tried this on when finding the right fit for the sleeve, and I realised the body is actually a lot longer than I thought, so not too much more work to go into this. I think I've said previously, maybe not on this video, but I've knit a cloud sweater before by Petite knit. It's the very first jumper that I ever knit that's actually wearable and I still wear, and I knit it, I think it was February last year. And it's really nice to knit a pattern a second time in exactly the same size with no changes. I've knit the Monday sweater as well by Petite knit twice, but I've knit that in 2 different sizes. But the benefit of knitting the same pattern in the same size again is that my kind of pattern notes and the highlights and things I've done on the pattern for the size and the size count that I need are all like accurate again for this next time. So it's just really easy to follow, and kind of the modifications that I made last time I'm just doing exactly the same again because I really enjoyed that fit. So the only modifications that I've made is Petite knit recommends that you knit the whole sleeve, so the ribbon and the rolled edge at the end of the sleeve, all on the same size needles. I went half a needle size up to 5mm needles, which is what I do for all Petite knit patterns because I'm a tight knitter. But I'd put in my previous notes for this that I'd gone down to 4.5mm needles just for the ribbon, and I think that's because, and this is a long time ago I'm thinking of, but I think in that time when I knit the ribbon on the same 5mm needles, it kind of flared out a bit. My ribbon is maybe slightly looser than my stockinette, and I think that's consistent for all people, but maybe mine is just more loose. So I did the same again. I went down to 4.5mm needles for the ribbon. I kept that for the kind of stockinette stitches, and then I went up to 5mm needles when I was doing the bind off, just so the bind off would be slightly looser. It's still tight enough that it rolls, but it's loose enough that it's got a little bit of stretch, so it doesn't feel like too tight on the end of my wrist. And I'm really happy with that. I think this is a good opportunity to kind of tell you about the needles that I use, because I use Knit Pro needles, and I know they've been getting a bit of a bad rep recently. So for my sleeves, I use short circulars. I used to do my sleeves on magic loop, or is it called like a travelling loop maybe, when you make a loop and you use that to go all the way around, rather than magic loop is kind of a loop of your cable on both sides. But I've converted to short circulars and I absolutely love them. It's just so mindless being able to knit in the round, and I don't get what I used to get with magic loop, where one of the knit stitches is kind of pulled or larger, because that's where I'm transferring my cable over. And I did kind of help prevent that kind of pull by moving where my start of the magic loop would be on each round, but that just makes the sleeve go so much slower. So I love short circulars. These are my 4.5mm needle ones, and I bought these as kind of fixed circulars, so you can't remove the needle. And then I wanted some 5mm. I think I got these when I was doing my Dagmar zipper sweater by Petite knit as well. And I couldn't find some 5mm needles in the fixed, so I ended up getting 5mm short tips and then kind of an interchangeable cable, and I'm so much happier with this option. I hope you're able to see, but with this option the needle is longer, like ever so slightly longer, but the actual kind of length that is fixed before you get to the cable is longer as well, because the interchangeable end at the end of the cable adds a bit of length, and I think the longer needles feel more comfortable in my hands when I'm knitting. It feels closer to kind of normal interchangeable needles. The very short tip is a little bit more work on my hand, so if I was going to buy these again, I definitely just buy the short needles and an interchangeable cable. The other thing I love about this interchangeable cable is that I think I got this as part of the Pro Mindful collection, and all of their cables, from what I believe, are kind of transferable between their different collections. And the Mindful collection has the swivel cable, so this needle is able to swivel on the cable, and that also reduces a lot of stress on my hands, which I really like. This isn't just the case for the short circulars, but it's also the case for Pro Symfonie kind of normal set of interchangeable needles. So their interchangeable needle set was the first needle set that I bought, and I have a whole range of their normal interchangeable needles. And they come with a few different lengths of cables that are fixed. They don't have that kind of swivel, and the cable itself isn't very flexible. It's a bit stiff and not the most enjoyable to work with, but I don't mind it too much. However, having recently discovered, or maybe 6 months ago discovered, the Mindful collection, I've bought a selection of different Mindful cables. So here we are, this is an example, and these Mindful longer cables attach to the Pro Symfonie set, and they swivel. So I think that's a really good kind of upgrade to make to existing sets that you have. It's prevented me from buying a more expensive set with more expensive cables. I definitely spend money on buying a whole new interchangeable set just for the swivel cable, rather than just buying a few additional swivel cables. So that's just a little tip if you didn't know that about Pro. And I don't think I've shown this before either, but this is my kind of knitting case where I keep all my little knitting notions. I based it off a Sustrena Grena knitting case, but I actually sewed this myself. I just kind of used the measurements from that, and then I returned it to the store. But I prefer my version as it has this zipper pocket at the side, which is a huge kind of pencil case size case where I can hold kind of little bits and bobs. I was able to adapt the sizes of the kind of needle holders to fit the exact needles that I have and the amount of needles that I have. And then I also have this huge space at the back, which is held with Velcro, where I can fit kind of loads of different stuff, maybe printed patterns. I don't really use that section, but it's good to be able to use every section of the fabric rather than just a small amount. I don't have a pattern or anything for this, but if you're into sewing, it's definitely kind of beginner friendly. I only had a really kind of cheap old sewing machine that I borrowed from my parents, and I was just seeing what worked when making this little knitting case, and I really love it. The only change that I'd make next time, if you're interested in making one of these, is to make this kind of flap at the top much longer and cover all of my needles, because I do have to wrap this really tightly. If I don't, then the needles can fall out because there's nothing kind of covering these needles if I tip this upside down. So I do have to keep this right way up. It's definitely not perfect, and I think in the Petite knitting case that flap goes all the way across, and that's why. So yeah, I really like my little knitting case. I didn't say about the fabrics for that case either, in case you're interested, but one of them is just a fat square that I got from Hobbycraft, and the other kind of plain blue is a bed sheet that I got from a charity shop that I've used in so many different projects. It's the lining of pretty much every knitted bag that I have, so you can get a lot out of bed sheet. So we're heading to Denmark today. I think we're maybe 2 hours, an hour and a half from the border to Denmark, but I'm going to do the first part of the drive-in again so that all of the part that I'm the passenger I can be knitting in Denmark. And we're staying on a really lovely campsite in Denmark that we stayed at on the way here. We spent maybe 3 or 4 nights there on the way here. It has a ping pong table that I'm very excited to be able to get to, and a foosball table, which is so much fun. But the reason that I'm saying this is because the project that I chose, I actually cast on when I was at this campsite on the way here. And although it's been maybe 6 weeks since we've been to that campsite, I haven't got this project done. So I thought that would be the really perfect project to choose for Denmark. So the project is the Claire Vest by Mochi knits. I don't think I've spoke about this project in any sort of detail on a video before, so it's like fairly new to you guys. It's a summer vest that's kind of knitted back and forth, and it has a nice kind of V-neck shaping, a few little buttons, and I think like a kind of triangular bottom, so it has like a bit of shaping at the kind of waist hip area. And the thing that drew me to the Claire vest over the sole top, which is also by Mochi knits because they look fairly similar, is that Mochi knits had a post on her Instagram describing the differences, so I'll read some of them out. The Claire vest has thinner straps and slightly lower armhole, less ease and it's better for drapey yarns, and I thought all of those things were kind of my preferred fit over the sole top, and this yarn is definitely drapey, so I'm glad I've gone for the Claire Vest. And the yarn I'm using is Isager Hoare Organic in the colour Linen, and it is 100% linen, and it's 50 grams to 178 metres. I was gifted this yarn by my boyfriend as I think it was a Christmas present, and I hadn't used it for a couple years because I was worried that the colour was too close to my skin colour, but now I've got ever so slight of a tan, not much of a tan for most people, but ever so slight of a tan. I think it should actually look all right. I'm not too big of a fan of how this linen feels at the moment, and I'm just telling myself constantly that it will get softer when I block it, it'll get softer with wear, it'll get softer when I wash it. So I'm really hoping that is the case because it feels a bit kind of ropey and stiff at the moment. It's not like scratchy at all and it'll be fine on my skin. It's not soft. I wouldn't describe it as soft. My other concern at the moment is that I think it may be a bit see-through. So I've got gauge for this pattern and it's the recommended kind of weight of yarn, and I think this yarn is recommended in the sole top and I think they're the same gauge, but it is kind of see-through and I don't think that the colour really helps with that. So I might struggle to style this once it's knitted, and because of that it's not really giving me much motivation to knit on it. The other reason I'm lacking motivation is that I'm just knitting back and forth now, or knitting and purling. I'm doing stockinette stitch basically back and forth, and so the really long purl rows, and there is like a lot of stitches going back and forth because the gauge is so small. The really long purl rows are just not very enjoyable. My style of knitting is, I think it's called English flicking.
Sorry?
Which maybe sounds a bit odd, but yeah, I like use my index finger to flick the yarn over, and the way that I do knits and purls is fairly similar. I'm just putting the needle into a different part and I'm still just doing the same motion. So I really shouldn't dislike the purling so much, but I do. I don't think any of us prefer purling over knitting, or maybe that's kind of a broad statement to make, but there we go. So I think it will be a really nice light airy summer top, as the good things about this pattern. The, again, not so good things about this pattern, I feel like I'm not being very positive about this, but the pattern is kind of on the more expensive side for patterns that I've bought off Ravelry, and I completely understand the price that a pattern designer sets their pattern at. There's a lot of work that goes into pattern making. I think it's really important to support kind of independent and smaller pattern designers, and I can see from the pattern the reason why this one is a little bit more expensive. So there's lots of schematics, there's lots of diagrams that shows you this is what your knit should look like at this point, and this is where you attach your yarn, or this is the direction you're knitting in based upon kind of how your knit is supposed to look, or kind of images and illustrations that are really, really helpful and things that I haven't seen in other patterns before. So there's definitely a lot of work and kind of detail gone into writing up this pattern. And those are things I do appreciate, especially because there's quite a lot of short row shaping in this. So the short rows on both the front and the back of these sleeves, which you might be able to see, my short rows in this linen yarn aren't very good. So it is helpful to have those illustrations showing kind of like a triangle, and this is how your short row should look, and then this is where you're going now, because it's kind of small and fiddly and a bit complicated, and those illustrations take out that complicatedness. But one of the things I dislike about maybe Mochi Knit's pattern writing, or maybe just this pattern in particular, is that the increases for this section at the front, so the kind of triangular front sections, is charted, and there's no written instructions for the increases for these sections, and so the different charts for all of the different sizes take up, I don't know, like 20 pages of the pattern. It's a fairly big file, and you kind of have to look at the chart and tick off where you are on the chart when doing your increases. I think it's definitely something that could have been written, because you're doing fairly consistent increases, so they could say kind of increase at this point for so many rows, or I don't know, the kind of the way that other pattern designers would say repeat rows 2 and 3, maybe an increase row and a knit row or something like that. So I don't think it's like necessarily important to have charts for that section. I think it may be helpful if you're kind of a visual learner or kind of like that visual cue, but the reason that it kind of frustrated me is the file size was so big, and I use patterns on my phone because it's just the most accessible, and I kind of highlight sections that I'm at. And so when I was highlighting these sections, the file size was just getting bigger and bigger and bigger on my phone, and it was slow and it was lagging, and I was struggling to scroll through the 20-25 pages to get to the actual chart that I needed, and it made it kind of a frustrating process to knit this section, or both of these sections, the two front sections. I think this could have easily been remedied if I'd have just printed the pattern and printed just the exact pages that I needed, or maybe used my laptop. But again, that's kind of a barrier to me picking this knitting up, because it's not the way that I would normally go about knitting a pattern, just bringing the pattern up on my phone and kind of following the instructions there. So yeah, that's all to say there's definitely positive and negatives to pattern writing, and I think it's good to try different pattern designers and see kind of whose pattern writing you prefer. I don't think it's things that are going to stop me from knitting Mochi Knits patterns in the future, and it might be a reason that other people absolutely love Mochi Knits patterns because of those kind of visual guides. But yeah, this is going to be my Denmark knit. I think we probably, again, only have maybe 24 hours in Denmark, and I'm not sure how much time out of that 24 hours I'm going to have to knit, but I'll update you in Denmark as to the progress that I've made. We are at the most beautiful campsite in Denmark, and we came here about 6 weeks ago on our way towards Norway, and we came down to this little kind of cabin veranda type area with some seating, and looked out to this field, and I remember there being some wildflowers there, but it definitely didn't look like the field looks today. It is full of sunflowers. It's so beautiful, and this may be one of my favourite backdrops for a little kind of talking segment in these videos. So I'm happy to show you the progress that I made on my Claire vest. This was my little progress marker from when I showed you yesterday, and since then I've been able to knit up 7 centimetres of just back and forth stockinette knitting, and I really like this, not so much of a challenge but kind of task of working on one project each day or in each particular country, because if I hadn't have set myself that little kind of task of working on this, I don't know how long it would have took me to go back to it. And now that I have been back to it over the past day or so, doing the pearl rows isn't actually that bad, and knitting on this isn't actually as bad as I'd kind of remembered in my head. I think I've got to a nice point of this now where it's just back and forth before I get to the little kind of shaping at the bottom. So I think I'll be picking this up more frequently than I did before, which is a nice surprise. I don't have very much yarn left of the second ball, and I have 2 more balls of this Isager Raw Organic left, and I think that's what the pattern recommends. So I'm probably about halfway through. I think probably maybe over halfway through, but yeah, we'll see. I'll keep you updated in future videos of this knit. So we're travelling towards Germany today, and we're going to be sleeping somewhere in Germany, but I have absolutely no idea where. It's quite unusual that we have any sort of plan of where we're going to be sleeping or staying on a certain day, and over the past few days we have known exactly where we're staying because we're doing the same journey in reverse. But the place that we stayed at in Germany was really nice. It was kind of an old farm that's been took over, and it's now an event space and campsite, but it was just a bit too far from the main road that I feel like we'd be going a bit off course. So whilst we're driving, we're going to try and find some destination in Germany to stay. So I'm not sure kind of how long of today's driving is going to be in Germany, or how much time we're going to have in Germany when we get there, but the project that I'm going to be working on during that probably short period in Germany is my mixed rib cami by Florence Miller. So you guys may have seen a small amount of this one before, as I've shown it in a previous video. Oh, it's a bit tangled, but I've worked quite a lot on this one. I've been really enjoying the process. It's kind of mindless in that it's just ribbing, and it's a very repetitive pattern, and you're able to read your stitches so easily from above that you don't need to like look at the pattern when you're knitting. But it takes kind of a bit more concentration because you're doing twisted rib and like knits and pearls and things, so it's quite nice to work on. I feel like when I'm working on this the time just flies, and the yarn is really nice as well. So I'm using the Camarosa wool and cotton blend. I've always not really wanted to say this name because I know that I'll butcher it, but it's 70% merino wool and 30% cotton, and it's 50 grams to 230 meters. and it has a really nice feel to it. It's definitely dry, you can feel the dryness of the cotton, and maybe it's a slightly dry merino, but it's super soft. It's definitely elastic and stretchy. It feels very elastic when I'm working with it, kind of like it's just 100% wool, so it's not hard on my hands at all, which is nice. But yeah, the progress that I've made since the last time I showed you is I'd finished the back panel. So you do a kind of just square back panel, and then you do some shaping for underneath the arms. And then you pick up these two sides to do a little bit of shaping here for the neckline, but it is quite a straight boat neckline. And then you work the same sort of panel down on the front with some shaping under the arms, and I'm now working in the round. I've only been working in the round for maybe a row or two. So working in the round is where this project might slow down if I didn't have these little kind of tasks of making it my priority knit, because I feel like I have quite a long section of this ribbing to do now to like cover the length of my torso. And in the pattern there is some suggestions for waist shaping if you want waist shaping, and I think I am going to do this waist shaping, but I'm not entirely sure how yet. So the reason I want to do the waist shaping is because when I cast this on, I think my measurements were slightly larger than they are now. I don't know if that's due to the fact we've been eating really healthy and going on lots of walks, and there hasn't been much choice of food in Norwegian shops, food shops. So we've been eating kind of very basic foods and a bit less than usual. A lot of these European countries kind of centre their meals around meat and fish and cheeses and milks, and I eat plant-based, so I don't eat those things, and I don't feel like the cupboard essentials or kind of world foods have been very good in Norwegian food shops. So yeah, we've been cooking all of our meals from scratch and eating very healthy. So I think I need to do the waist shaping to account for the fact I've probably knitted a size up from what I am now. So the only concerns I have with the waist shaping is that I'm not entirely sure how to go about it from what the pattern says. So you cast on a certain number of stitches under the arms, and it doesn't say exactly what to do with these stitches under the arms because they don't work directly into the pattern repeat, so they don't work to the same stitch count as kind of your twisted rib sections and your rib sections. So I've just been kind of knitting all of those stitches, and so there's going to be a kind of slightly larger knit panel under the arm than like in between these two twisted rib sections, for example. You're advised to cast on a certain number of stitches for your size under the arms, and then it says to do the waist decreases as recommended in the pattern, but to always keep a certain number of stitches under the arms. Well, the number of stitches that I've casted on is only like 2 or something more stitches than she recommends to keep under the arm. So I don't know if that means I can only do like 2 stitches decreased under the arms and that's my waist shaping done, or what. So I'm just gonna do some waist decreasing to what looks nice and what seems to like fit, and see where it goes from there. The pattern is written very kind of straight to the point. There's no real wordiness or paragraphs of long text or anything, and there's quite a few sections where it says do this and then continue in pattern, and it doesn't really kind of hold your hand through the knitting process. I haven't minded that as I've had quite a lot of knitting experience now, and I don't feel like I've struggled with the pattern in any way other than maybe this waist decreasing thing. You definitely have enough instructions to be able to get a really nice finished outcome, but if you're a beginner or maybe less experienced knitter, I'm not sure this is going to be the easiest pattern to follow, as yeah, it doesn't like hold your hand through the process. I think this is my preferred pattern writing style. I do find that with overly wordy patterns, I sometimes kind of lose things in those paragraphs, and it is really kind of straight to the point and easy to see and easy to follow the instructions when it's just kind of the bare minimum and you can see all of the instructions really easily. You're not trying to kind of fish for the instructions through paragraphs of text. So I'll definitely be following some of Florence Miller's patterns again in the future, and I'm really happy with the way that this mixed rib cami is working up. I love the colour, I love the texture, and I'm excited to have it in my wardrobe. I don't feel like I'm going to lose momentum to knit on this even when the summer's over, because it is 70% wool, so I definitely feel like I could wear this during the autumn and during the winter months, maybe just with like a cardigan or something over the top. So yeah, really loving this one, and this is going to be my Germany knit. So since we're doing so much driving and this video kind of is documenting the amount of driving that we're doing over a few days, I thought it might be interesting to you guys to see how we keep ourselves entertained on long drives. So the van is fairly old and it has a CD player, which I'm very happy about. Playing CDs in the van sounds so much better on the speakers than like plugging our phone in or anything. So we brought lots of our CDs with us on this trip. I'll like show you some flicking through the CDs, so if you see any that you recognise or artists that you love as well, then let me know. But some of my favourite CDs to listen to on long drives are CMAT, Wolf Alice if we want to be a bit more kind of energetic, Bess Atwell for nice kind of calm, easy driving. Yeah, there's lots of choice in here. If we feel like we need a bit more entertainment, then it must have been like maybe 4 years ago now, I found the Radio 1 Live Lounge CDs in a charity shop and kind of made it my mission then to try and track down all of the Radio 1 Live Lounge CDs in charity shops, which I feel like I've been able to do somewhat. I have quite a lot of them now, and I brought a lot of them with me in the back of this kind of CD case. And if you don't know about the Live Lounges, BBC is a radio station in the UK, and they bring in artists to their kind of live studio and they play songs either from themselves or from other artists. So we listen to the Radio 1 Live Lounge and we try and decipher the artist and the song from listening to it, and the song is often easier to get. The artists often kind of really mix up the song or turn the song into a different genre, so sometimes it's a bit difficult, but the actual song is generally easier to get. But trying to figure out who the artist is just by their voice is often a lot more difficult, and a lot of these CDs are from like early 2010s or like mid 2010s, so they're artists that we kind of listened to growing up, which is fun. So that's like a really enjoyable game that keeps us very entertained. The only difficulty is when we've listened to both discs, we then have to wait quite a long time to kind of play the game with that same disc again, because we kind of remember who the artists and the songs are, especially if they're really bad. Some of them are like really not enjoyable to listen to. But yeah, that's a fun game if you ever want some kind of car entertainment. And the other things that we like to do is listen to podcasts. So some of my favourite podcasts are No Such Thing as Fish, which I've talked about before. It's kind of a group of people who each week come on the podcast and talk about their fact of the week, and they discuss it, and there's a bit of humour in there, and it's interesting in that you're hearing about different facts, but it is quite funny. And then music related podcasts we enjoy listening to together. We listen to Song Exploder, where an artist comes on to the podcast and breaks down their song and how that song came about, and Tape Notes, which is kind of a more detailed version of Song Exploder. So an artist will come on and go into a lot more detail about maybe a whole album or songs. So yeah, I'd love some more podcast suggestions. If any of you have any podcasts that you absolutely love listening to, then I definitely need more to listen to, because we're pretty much all caught up on Song Exploder and Tape Notes, so we definitely need some more. And I'll keep you updated on my progress of the mixed rib Cami in Germany. See you then. So I managed to knit 4 centimetres on my mixed rib Cami in my time in Germany, and it's not as much as I thought I would knit, but I think that's mainly due to me not doing very much knitting when I was a passenger driving through Germany yesterday. I've driven through Germany a fair few times now, and each time it's not been a very enjoyable experience. The roads are always really busy, there seems to be traffic everywhere because of roadworks and things, and it just takes a long time. And yesterday we were driving through a heat wave, it's like 30 degrees, and we have no aircon in the van, so I was really hot, it was making me really tired. I just didn't want to knit, that's the last thing that I wanted to do, so I didn't get much knitting done during the time I was a passenger. But we've come to this stop, again not my favourite stop on the trip, but it's just a hotel car park that allows campers, and we have got this beautiful bit of grass and a view of a cornfield over there, so I can look that way rather than that way, which isn't so nice. And I've been enjoying sitting on the grass in the shade and doing a bit of knitting, so that's where most of my 4 centimetres has come from. But I don't think I mentioned in yesterday's clip that I'm knitting the mixed rib cami on 3mm needles, and I'm knitting the Claire vest as well on 3mm needles, in case I forgot. And I'm using metal needles for this. I thought metal needles would be easier to do the twisted stitches because they're a bit sharper and kind of easier to do the twisted stitches with. But my metal 3mm needles are fixed circular, and this cable is longer than my knitting in the round. So I'm doing the travelling loop, and I think I spoke to you guys about the travelling loop, which is how I used to do sleeves in a previous clip, but I forgot that I was doing the travelling loop in this, so I'll kind of show you what I mean in case I explain that really badly. So rather than magic loop where you have 2 of these loops, I just have kind of 1 of the loops, and the loop is making that cable shorter so I'm able to knit in the round. And when I get to that loop, I leave like 2 stitches left on the loop, so I'm moving where that kind of junction of the loop is each time. Where that kind of junction is, it can sometimes cause a little pull in your knitting, and it's obvious where the loop is, so I like to move that each round so that it's not too obvious. So yeah, I pull the loop through so my circular needle is the size that I need it to be, and then I just keep on knitting with that loop kind of hanging there, and it works really well. It means I get a lot more use out of my fixed circulars, and I don't have to buy fixed circulars in lots of different cable sizes. So yeah, a good little trick. I don't actually have any more whips on my needles, and we're heading to the Netherlands now. I think it's only going to take about 3 hours for us to get to the Netherlands, but we're going to be driving through midday sun, which isn't too enjoyable. But I don't have a knitting project on the needles as such to choose as my Netherlands knit. I could cast something on, but I have some plans for kind of big cast-ons that I need to pick up yarn for still, so I don't want to cast on anything from the yarn that I have with me at the moment. But I have really missed doing my spinning over these past few days when I've been focusing on knitting. So I think I'm going to make spinning up some fibre on my drop spindle my Netherlands project. So this is the fibre that I have on my drop spindle at the moment, and it looks kind of better like this. It's a blend of Jacobs and silk, and I think it's a 50-50 blend. It doesn't say exactly on the label. I bought this as part of the Inspiring Yarns mixed breed box, where you get 20 grams of lots of different breeds of sheep, and it's kind of a introduction to how different fleeces spin up and kind of different fibres spin up. But it seems from the blend that it's 50-50. It definitely has a lot more silk in it than I thought it was going to have. And I haven't spun with silk before. I'm finding it a really interesting process. I've been dividing the wool top up into smaller sections and making faux lags out of it, so kind of just separating the fibres and rolling it up. And I think that really helps because the silk is really slippy, and I think if I was to spin it directly from this, the silk would be really, really difficult to spin because it would just slide off each other. So rolling it up into a faux lag gives me a bit more grippiness and a bit more kind of control over the fibre. It means that not all of the fibre lengths are so aligned, so it causes a bit more stickiness, I think. So yeah, I'm definitely enjoying doing the faux lag method, but I have found the 50% wool, 50% silk to be a bit more difficult than just wool, which is what I've worked with before. When I'm spinning, I often pick up a large amount of silk, and then once I'm spinning with that silk, it's only drawing more and more silk out of the faux lag. And then I have to kind of manually add a bit of wool to it, because when it's just the silk, it wants to spin really, really thin. And if it just pulls the silk, it's not consistent with the rest of my spin. So yeah, I'm having to manually add a bit of kind of wool to the silk so I can get a consistent spin. But this 50% wool, 50% silk does just want to spin up really fine. I am struggling with all of the kind of drop spindle spinning that I've done, that I do seem to be spinning like a lace weight yarn each time, and I'm struggling to get a spin that's any thicker than that. I don't know if it's because I'm being a bit kind of forceful with it and drawing it out as much as possible, but I don't get too many breakages, so maybe it's kind of just my style of spinning. I would like to practice spinning larger fibres, maybe a DK weight or an Aran weight, but yeah, I haven't quite figured out how to do that yet. I have finished a few other spins that I haven't showed you, so I'll start with this white Polworth spin. It is quite ropey. I haven't put any of these on like a niddy noddy and wet them or kind of blocked them as such, just because I haven't had the means of kind of blocking them and drying them whilst in the van. So I don't know if this will bloom a lot once it's been washed, but at the moment it does look quite ropey. I feel like I've probably overspun it. I don't think I'm over plying anything because I'm really struggling to ply on the drop spindle. I've tried plying by spinning my singles into a cake using my ball winder and plying from the inside and the outside of that cake, and I feel like that is easier, that I can get kind of a bit of tension and I'm not kind of losing the twist in my singles, but then the yarn gets tangled and it becomes this whole mess and the singles are all kind of coiling up on themselves. So I've tried winding 2 yarn cakes and pulling from 2 yarn cakes, and I've found that easier, but I've got nothing to hold those yarn cakes on. I know a lot of people who have spinning wheels, they're called lazy cakes, I think, that hold the bobbins, and they hold the bobbins on a bit of tension so that you can kind of get that tension that you need to remove the coils, but I don't have anything to hold that on, so maybe I'll look for like some sort of holder for the balls of yarn so that I can pull on the yarn a bit more so that I have a bit of tension. But yeah, I think a lot of my roping effect is because of overspinning. So yeah, this is the white Polworth, and this one here is the first one that I did on this trip, and I think this is just Jacob's by itself. I'm really happy with how this one came out. I feel like it's really consistent, again, not been like washed or blocked or anything, but I'm getting like a really kind of consistent spin, and it's the proudest I've been of a spin on my drop spindle so far. So I like the way this has turned out. Again, it feels really rough, it feels kind of ropey, but I don't know if it just feels rough because of the fibre content, because of the Jacobs, but we'll see if that blooms when washing. The final thing that I've spun is some of this merino top that I bought from Hillersvåg. I think I probably have like maybe 30 grams of the 120 grams left that I bought. And this one isn't so consistent. You can definitely see where some of my singles are inconsistent weight. So the thinner one is kind of like warping the larger one. And some of my singles have become a bit like thicker and unspun maybe in the plying process. But regardless, I'm happy with how this turned out. This definitely feels much softer than my Polworth and my Jacobs. And again, that could be because of the fibre content, or it could be because I've kind of spun this a bit looser and it's not so ropey. I am very happy that I have more of this amount, that I feel like I could actually make something with it. There's only 20 grams of each of these, so I'm not sure what sort of projects I'll use these in, maybe a scrappy project. But I do have a fair amount of this merino top, and because I'm spinning it quite finely, I think it's a light fingering weight yarn. For the most part, I feel like I probably do have a lot of meterage and I might be able to get an actual project out of this. So my plans for today is to finish spinning up this Jacobs and silk, and then my aim is to go back to my Hillersvåg merino top and spin up as much of this as possible. I'm doing the same method where I'm breaking a bit off and rolling it into a faux lag because it is quite like a slippy fibre, and I do like using that kind of method. So yeah, I think that's my plan for the day. I'm really excited to be spinning more. I am enjoying spinning so much, and I'm really sad that I can't have like an e-spinner or a spinning wheel. There's just no room for it in the van. But I am very grateful for kind of how this trip has made me use a drop spindle, because it's the only thing that I can do kind of portably, and it's really kind of developed my love for spinning. So yeah, I'll keep you updated on my spinning progress, and I'll see you in the Netherlands. I apologise if my hair's wet. I couldn't wait to take a shower when we got to this campsite. It's been so hot all day. I think it came up to like 36 degrees, the temperature in the van, which is just ridiculous, but it's finally cooled down a bit this evening, so it might be a bit dark, and the campsite we're at is like 5 minutes from the festival. We can actually see the festival site from the campsite, so it's a perfect place to be. I'll show you what I got up to today. So I think I said this wrong in the last clip, but I looked at the packaging again, and this is Blue-Faced Leicester with Tussar Silk, not Jacobs, but the other one that I spun up a bit longer ago was Jacobs, and you can kind of see the colour difference. This is like a mulled whitey grey colour, but yeah, Blue-Faced Leicester. I managed to finish the 20 grams of this. I think I only had about 4 or 5 grams left, and it spun up really nicely. I did get to a point in the journey, my boyfriend was kind enough to do the whole drive in today, which was about 3 hours, where I'd spun all of this up, and I thought, shall I start spinning on my merino just off the back of this, and then when I kind of unwind them into a ball I'll just snip it there, or shall I wait and wind this into a ball and then wind the or spin the merino up separately? And I was very lucky that we got to a point in the journey when it was just too hot to keep driving and we needed a break. So we pulled over, went to a Lidl, got some food, and I was able to wind this up into a ball. And it's the first time that we've actually driven into like a town in the Netherlands. The place we were in is called New Amsterdam, and the Netherlands is beautiful. The little town, I don't know if it's like a kind of particularly touristy town or anything, but it was really, really sweet. There was loads of cute little shops. There was this huge canal that ran straight through the middle of the town, and lots of people were out just enjoying the sun on their boats. So it was a really nice place to be, and I'm excited to see more of the Netherlands now that we're here. I was also very happy by the selection of food in the Lidl. I don't know if this is going to be remotely interesting to anyone, but I've said before in this video that the food selection that we've been used to in Norway has been pretty poor in the supermarkets. There's maybe been just like kind of one option of tomato sauces or one option of pasta, but just this Lidl in the Netherlands, there was so much choice, and we went a bit mad at all of the different like plant-based foods that we could get. So we've had some nice like filled pasta, we got hummus and we could choose a flavour of hummus. There was lots of different bread options, olive bread, which I love and missed so much. So yeah, we just had a great time picking some lunch and driving to this spot here. This was where I was going to kind of wrap up the video because we've got to our destination, but I've just been packing for the things that I'm going to be taking into the festival, and I realised that to go from the camping grounds to the festival, oh, a light came on, you can only take in a certain size of bag, and I think I have found the perfect bag in my collection. I knitted up this very comically small Bridget bag by Gregoria Fibres fairly recently, over the past couple months or so, and I've shown it previously on a video, but I haven't really kind of talked through the details of the bag and what I thought about the pattern and things, so it kind of reminded me that I needed to do that. So as I said, this is the Bridget bag by Gregoria Fibres, and it's knit up in Mondial cotton in a colour I'm unsure of. I'll put the details below, but it's a yarn that I picked up in kind of the sale baskets in Kathy's Knits in Edinburgh. And I knit this on the recommended needles, which is 2.5mm needles, but I didn't do a gauge swatch because the pattern is kind of complicated as it is, and I just wanted to dive in. But the yarn that's recommended is Dropspell or Sandnesgarn Line, and I've said previously in a video, but that yarn is a lot kind of thicker and a bit more kind of splitty and airy as such than the mercerized cotton that I use. So I think that's why I was so wildly off gauge. And this is much, much smaller than the pattern recommends. So I haven't actually worn it yet because it does look quite comically small, but I think it'll be perfect for the festival. And hopefully after a few days of wearing it around the festival, holding my water bottle and umbrella and sun cream and things, it will stretch out a bit. That's what I'm hoping for. The I-cord straps are kind of twisted I-cords, and they're really, really soft, and I don't think will be too heavy on my shoulders, so I think it's a good one to wear for the festival. In terms of the pattern, it was fairly easy to follow. Doing the repeated kind of shell lace pattern up the kind of sides of the bag was really, really easy, and you do that in the round. And I found the instructions fairly easy to follow. The instructions are only written and it's not charted, which I think is a kind of preference for some people or not a preference for others. I do wish it was charted. I like to kind of see the visual chart so I know what I'm working towards. I think maybe I'm a bit of a visual learner and that cue helps, but I didn't find it difficult to use the written instructions. The thing that I was kind of disappointed with this pattern is on all of the pattern photos, this shell lacing continues into the triangles that are on each corner of the bag. And when I was doing the pattern, I was kind of just following it as the instructions were written, and I realised after the first triangle that my shell pattern didn't continue, and I thought, have I done something wrong? Like, why is mine not looking like that? And I was looking through different Ravelry projects, and some of them seemed to be okay, and then I found a couple that looked like mine. But diving deeper into the notes on Ravelry, other people are annoyed about this as well, that the pattern photos have the lace detail but the pattern instructions don't have the lace detail, and I think that's something that should be explicitly listed in the pattern, like before you buy it. I think it's a bit misleading for the pattern photos to not be representative of what the pattern actually is, and people have made the modification to include that lace detail, but because I'd already done one or maybe 1.5 at this point, I just continued as the pattern was written, and I don't think it looks as seamless as the pattern photos, which is a bit disappointing, but I was overall a little bit disappointed with the size of this bag anyway, so it's not a big deal in the grand scheme of things. There was also some slightly confusing parts when it came to doing the I chord. It's written in the instructions, kind of part 1 is where you do the I chord from this side to this side, and part 2 is where you do the I chord from this side to this side. And there's a photo underneath where you'd assume 1 and 2 would be on the photos or some sort of arrows to direct you, but it's not, it's just kind of photos of what it should look like. So I feel like that could have been written slightly easier to understand, but I still managed to get the desired effect. So to summarise, I really like the look of this bag. I think I would repeat the bag in Sandnesgarn Line if I felt like I needed that in my wardrobe, but I don't think I need 2 kind of lacy bags in my wardrobe. I feel confident that it is going to stretch. It is a cotton, I'm going to be holding heavy things in it, so I think I can get a fair amount of stretch out of it. Maybe I'll update you after the festival to see what the bag looks like then. It might be completely ruined and covered in mud, who knows. But yeah, I'm excited to head over to the festival. I've really enjoyed doing this video, kind of a little challenge of dedicating a particular knit to a particular country, and I think maybe it's something I'll do in the future. Maybe not so much with going to different countries, because I don't do this sort of travel all the time, but dedicating a knit to a certain day maybe, so I can see how much progress I can make on that knit, and it's a bit of motivation to get on with the knits that I maybe push into the back of my whip pile, so maybe it's something that you want to try yourself as well. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video, and if you have, then consider liking and subscribing to the channel. I have a Patreon, so if you feel like you're able to or want to give any money to support the production of the videos for this channel, then that's a way that you can do that. There'll be no additional content over on the Patreon, as I want all of my content to be free for everyone to watch, so donating money there is just allowing everyone to have kind of access to these videos and the production of future videos. And to this point I haven't taken on any sponsorships, and I don't feel like my kind of values align with a lot of sponsorships, particularly from brands that I don't know or don't use myself, so supporting the Patreon is a way to support the channel without me kind of taking on sponsorships. So thank you for being here, and I hope to see you in the next video.